Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Facebook Live. I am Katie Sweeney. I'm the CEO over at AIME, and today we are having a very important and very exciting conversation that I have been pumped about having for a while now, so I'm excited that we're finally here. I have Aaron Sims, who is a diversity and inclusion coach over at UWM, and DeAndre Lipscomb, who is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Homepoint Financial. We are talking about just that. Diversity, equity, inclusion, what it is, why it's important, why it's something that we need to be focusing on specifically in our industry. So we're going to kick it off right away. DeAndre, I would love to hear from both of y'all, Aaron as well. We'll start with DeAndre. What does diversity and inclusion mean to you? We toss that term out a lot. I think it's a really popular phrase to say right now, but I don't know that everyone really understands what it means. So I want to hear from each of y'all's perspectives. What is diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me. So at Homepoint, we have a saying that diversity and inclusion is our superpower, right? And diversity and inclusion is a broad term, but really what diversity and inclusion means to me, it truly is about coming together, and it's about people at the end of the day. It's about harnessing the backgrounds, the talents, the experiences of people, and then coming together and unifying around that. So you have the diversity piece of that term, and that's about, a lot of times people immediately go to racial and ethnic backgrounds, but you also have other dimensions of diversity in terms of, when you look at LGBTQIA, when you look at in terms of if someone has veteran status, gender, all of those type of things. And when you look at bringing that to a workplace, bringing that to a home buying experience, that's that richness, right? But then the inclusion piece of it is really about, do I feel like I belong? Am I included? It's one thing to say you respect diversity, but are you asking me for my opinion? Do I have an opportunity to express my opinion and how I feel? And do I have access, right? Do I have the same access as someone who is not from a background as mine? And that's really what diversity and inclusion is to me. It's truly about bringing people together and bringing them together and harnessing the power of their individual experiences, perspectives, and backgrounds.
I love that. Harnessing your superpower. That's very cool. Aaron, what about you? What does diversity and inclusion mean from your point of view?
First off, DeAndre, I love that example. That's wonderful. And one of the greatest examples that was ever given to me, or kind of a way to think about it, is when it comes to business and people. Like, there are a couple reasons why diversity and inclusion are important. Number one, if you think about good business and good business solutions and innovation in business, it really happens best when you have diversity. It's kind of like if you're a cook, if you're a chef, right? And you're trying to make all these unique dishes, whatever dish you love, it only works if you have the right ingredients, and you can't substitute those. So think about business and great business solutions and a great environment and atmosphere as being those dishes, and all of your people are your spices, your seasonings, your flavors, your ingredients. Some things just can't be created without having those different elements. And one thing I want to put out there, because I think DeAndre summarized it extremely well. The piece that really stands out to me that a lot of other organizations miss is diversity and inclusion is the name, but they are two pieces that are just as important. And what happens is there becomes this focus on diversity, diversity, diversity. We've got to get different people, get more people, diversity, diversity. But without the same focus and effort and almost even more energy on inclusion, it doesn't matter who you bring into the business if they don't feel like they have a voice, that they belong, that they can be themselves in the office. So diversity and inclusion is about finding the people and sourcing talent from different places that maybe you haven't looked before, because there's talent out there in all different walks and styles of life, bringing them together and then allowing people to feel like they can be themselves in this place, but also be part of something greater.
So you brought up something really, I love what both of y'all said, and clearly defining diversity and inclusion. It's not one word. There's an and in the middle, right? You have to separate the two and you have to focus on each. So let's break that down for a second. When you're thinking about bringing more diversity into a workplace, obviously both of y'all work for rather large organizations, right? Aaron, you've got 9,000 plus people over at UWM. DeAndre, Homepoint's at 3,000, 3,500.
4,100, yeah.
4,100. Okay, so both organizations have grown massively in the last 12 months. They're huge power players in our industry, but there are things that can be done at a smaller scale as well for a lot of our brokers that are out there that are thinking about how can I bring other people into our workplace? How do I create a diverse environment? How can, DeAndre, let's start with you. How can some of those smaller shops think about how to go and source that talent? Where do you find people that maybe have a different background or a different viewpoint than you? Because a lot of times we find ourselves surrounded by people who are like us. And so if, I'm at AIME, I now have 4 female leaders here and we had 1 9 months ago. Well, I've done that, but I haven't necessarily created a diverse environment here because now everyone looks like me. How do you source that talent? How do you bring diversity into the conversation on a smaller scale?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think that before you start looking for talent, you truly need to educate yourself and ground yourself in what diversity and inclusion is. So we've just given you a broad definition of diversity and inclusion and what it means to us. But there are different components in terms of when you're going to take on diversity and inclusion that you need to be aware of. Things such as unconscious bias, right? In terms of we tend to lean towards and we tend to, be attracted to and looking at talent, those people who look like ourselves. And you just gave that example. So I think before you start looking for talent, you have to ground yourself in those fundamentals around diversity and inclusion. But then in starting to look at talent, the first thing you need to do is start looking at talent in places that you wouldn't normally look, right? I mean, when you look at our industry, we have a great feeder pool coming from college campuses, right? These college campuses are diverse, right? We have an opportunity to really, with those college campuses, to create partnerships. And we have already some existing programs going on right now that actually does that. But so that's the first place to look, right? You have to look at the college campuses. Also, in terms of, let's look at our communities. Let's look at the different associations that are in our communities. Let's look at the different, nonprofit groups. All those are great ways in terms of, as if you're a smaller company, looking at how do you start D&I and how do you start to attract talent. You have a diverse talent. You have to go to where that diverse talent is. And you have to create those partnerships and those relationships that already have a network and an actual doorway into that diverse talent. So it's not something you have to do on your own, but you do have to start to really create those partnerships. And there's a lot of different resources available by geographic area. And one thing about mortgage brokers, they're very resourceful, right? So mortgage brokers, they know, they're able to find clients, they're able to close deals. It won't be a problem in terms of finding resources that can connect you with diverse talent.
Well, and we talk a lot about our members in our community, or our Brokers Are Better community is so ingrained in their local communities, right? Like where we hear stories all the time of people getting back, getting involved, wanting to participate in things sort of outside of their normal purview, but we don't always push that conversation or that narrative forward to then say, all right, don't just serve that community, find a way to bring them into your organization, right? If that's who you want to be helping and that's who you want to be working with, then you should also have people that reflect that part of the community or that segment of your audience that are part of your team as well. So you can better understand what those borrowers need, what their experience is like as a home buyer. I give the example all the time that I had a wonderful broker that I worked with when I bought my house, but he, in no malicious way at all, made a lot of comments the whole process about whether or not my dad was going to co-sign with me or if I had a husband who was going to show up. And I was a single 26-year-old buying a home for the first time. And he didn't mean it in a negative way, but he didn't understand. And he didn't have anybody on his team to help bring that perspective forward and say, maybe don't ask her for the 15th time if her dad is going to be at the closing to sign documents, right? It helps balance things out. Aaron, from your side, we talked about diversity and bringing people in, but once they're there, how do you focus on inclusion? So what sort of recommendations would you give? What kinds of things can people be doing to make sure you're not just bringing the talent forward, but then creating that inclusive environment through and through?
Yeah, great question. I think the number one thing that any organization can do to start fostering that inclusive environment is just take time and go listen to your people and be very intentional about it. Because it's very easy in the D&I space to get lost in all the training regimens and the material and the webinars and you want to bring out all these things, but D&I and especially fostering an inclusive environment is going to look different at UWM than it does at AIME, which is going to look different than Homepoint, which is going to look different than any of our broker partners, which is going to look different from any other organization. These have to be customized to your group, but I think it starts first and foremost with just taking time and listening to your people and asking questions. How do you feel about working here? What do you love about working here? What do you do for fun? What's most interesting to you? And then being able to find those things that spark passions in people and help tie those things into the business. Because once people feel like you as a business care about them, which you should, a good business should, you care about your people, you care about what's important to them, not just in the workplace, but also we're talking about your social issues, your things that traditionally in the past, the idea has been, hey, you need to compartmentalize that and leave it at the door, and understanding that I am a Black man. And there are some things that I just can't leave at the door when I walk into the workplace. And knowing that I have a place that feels supportive of me, that will listen, that will help support me and help me even find ways to deal with what I may be feeling. That's how you start fostering an inclusive environment. From there, you can only move upward because there are a lot of phenomenal things that you can springboard into. Resource groups and communities and clubs. Like there are lots of different great actionable things that you can do, but it all starts with taking time to listen and understand what concerns your people, what keeps them awake at night.
Well, and that same conversation is relevant when you're talking about serving your borrowers, right, in your community. We were talking about, how do we create that environment on our teams or within our businesses and make sure that we have a diverse and an inclusive space with access to leadership and resources and training and all of these other things that help develop people and help them grow. But at the end of the day, we're really just talking about a way to communicate with people. And how do you make sure that in the conversations that you're having with borrowers that maybe don't look like you or haven't had the same experiences that you have had, how do you make them feel like they're the most important part of the conversation, that they're included, that you're understanding and allow them the space to communicate? Again, going back to my example, and that's a big part of the reason why we wanted to launch Spark and Ignite. They were such a huge initiative for us and something that was so important that we were kind of looking around the table last summer and we saw, the broker channels growing, all of our partners are growing really aggressively. 2020 was kind of a crazy year, but the mortgage industry was very blessed in where we wound up. We didn't quite know how it was going to go back in March, but it landed in a really great spot for a lot of growth for a lot of people. But in that, we sort of saw ourselves saying, okay, well, we have all these new home buyers that are out there. We have all these new communities that now have access, that are focusing on financial literacy, underserved spaces that people are starting to give resources and give access to, but there's nobody in our industry that looks like them or feels like them or has the same sort of stories or the same experiences that they have had. DeAndre, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Why is this initiative so important for the mortgage industry specifically, that focuses on home ownership and access and the generational wealth that it can create for home buyers and homeowners over a lifetime?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you hit upon some very key points, and this initiative is so important, and that's why Homepoint, stepped up and wanted to be part of it. It's so important. You had mentioned earlier about representation. And in terms of from a home buyer standpoint, being able to work with mortgage brokers and people who look like them, right? People who understand their needs, their behaviors, but then also, it's allowing a great opportunity for us, which we know within the mortgage industry, that there is a need to grow diversity. So there's a need to grow diverse talent. And when you have programs such as, the Spark program and the Unite program, that's exactly what we're able to do, right? These are programs with a concentrated effort looking at helping to increase diversity in terms of opportunity for, I know with the African-American female brokers, but also, from an opportunity, from an education and training standpoint, to make sure that people, you creating that pipeline, that people are able to come in and you're able to get that education. And part of it is that we have to look at the, demographics in America are constantly changing. So when we look at, this next phase of home buyers, all of the studies show that the home buyers are becoming more diverse. You're not always having, married couples going in together to buy a home, right? You have, single women, you have people from diverse communities and backgrounds and all different types of situations. And in order for us to be able to adequately serve, this next generation, or what's occurring now and evolving, this evolving home buyer, we have to be knowledgeable, we have to be open, and we have to understand in terms of how diversity and inclusion plays a role. And I love the fact that what Aaron was saying about the inclusion piece of it, so that inclusion piece, right? That means that we are looking at, products that we're making available, such as the Refi Now product, right? I mean, that product, is launching, and that product is geared towards, low income home buyers, giving them an opportunity to refinance at great rates. So that's that inclusion piece, understanding that there's a need, and then being able to respond because we understand and we have the knowledge about that particular home buyer.
That's great. And we talk a lot about bringing people in, creating that environment. I love that point though about creating the products, right? And creating access. And I think a lot of times we use access from how can I talk to the right person, or how can I get the right training or the right resources, but kind of flipping that back to the borrower side, how are you creating access to financial literacy and information to areas and communities that don't traditionally have that? It's not a focus. It's not a part of their day-to-day life. If you grew up in an area where nobody owned a home, you're not thinking about how owning a home can change your life and your family's life. So what sorts of programs can we create, both loan products that DeAndre was referencing, but also outreach programs to areas and communities that maybe don't know? Not that they wouldn't be interested, not that they're not qualified or fully capable of homeownership. They just don't know it's an option, and they don't know where to get started. And that's a big part of this serving underserved communities initiative. It's how are we helping borrowers? How are we bringing people into the industry as loan officers and loan officer assistants and processors? How are we allowing entrepreneurs that want to start their own businesses and giving them access to grants and training and resources that help take their unique view and make it the thing that sets them apart? It's not a thing to overcome. We're now at the place where we want those to be things that help you stand out, the superpower, right? That you're harnessing and creating, and giving back. Aaron, I would love to hear kind of the same thing from your perspective. What sort of outreach can we be doing? How can brokers specifically, not just in their own businesses, but with borrowers and with homeowners and home buyers, be doing more to create a better environment for people to get access to this information?
Yeah, love that question. So a couple of things. One, I do want to speak really quickly on Spark and Ignite.
Yes,
because
please.
I think that ties into this question as well, because there's been such this over the last year, especially with what's happened in our social and political climate, but even dating back 10, 15 years beyond that, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of talk, and those things are important, but things don't change until true action happens. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason that I really like where Ignite and Spark are going, is because they're tangible, actionable steps toward trying to create more equity and opportunity for people that may not have had access to that before. And springboarding that into your other question, when it comes to how we can work with brokers, and our brokers can work with borrowers, but it's all about how can we create pipelines? How can we create action? Talk to your clients, ask them questions, understand what the people in your community are about, and then kind of look for those root cause things. Is it because, just like you said, maybe it's just people in this community don't really buy a lot. Maybe there's a lot more renting. Well, why? What's led us to this point? There's a lot of questions you can ask that'll help find, like, what's the root cause in this specific area, this specific community, that I can then become part of the solution on. Because in the grand scheme of things, at the end of this, it's going to create a greater pipeline for all of our clients, a greater pipeline for all of our brokers. It's going to create more educated buyers in the future. Like, it's really going to be a great thing if we're all a part of the solution, but it takes just that. We all have to be part of the solution, and then actively looking for those spots that we can fill in with action in our communities. That's different because different communities need different things.
Yeah. Go ahead, DeAndre, please.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Aaron is saying. And, it's about also making investments. So that's what the Spark and Ignite program does, right? It's making an investment in making sure that we are developing talent and making sure that the representation is there. One of the things that Homepoint has done is made a further investment by creating our own foundation. And the foundation is really charged with doing exactly what you've outlined in terms of providing financial education resources to the communities, right? It's about creating those partnerships and making sure that people understand the process of home buying, even before they go in to even apply, making sure that they understand the importance of credit scores and finances and all those type of things to make sure that it's a much smoother process for them. And so I think that is going to need continuous investment. I hope that others are able to see what you all are doing with the Spark and Ignite programs, and we could create hundreds of more of these programs because they are definitely needed, in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll wrap up in just a minute, as I know we've been talking about this for about 20 minutes now, but the key for me walking away, especially after talking with both of y'all and speaking with a lot of the people in our community, diversity, if there's one thing that you can walk away from today, diversity is about finding those voices and those perspectives. Inclusion is about the feeling that you're creating for those people to feel like they're a part of the community and they're welcome. The equity piece is about fostering it and taking action and moving forward. And how are you now not just finding the people and listening to what they need, but taking action on how you can actually help? And all three of those things are so critical, and actually seeing change. You can't stop at one or stop at two. You really have to get all the way through all three before you start to see some significant change. And that's our goal. All three of us are working on that every day with Spark and Ignite and all the initiatives that UWM and Homepoint have in working with our communities, with our teams and our businesses. The goal is to see people and really start to bring other people forward and give this opportunity for inclusion in an industry that hasn't always been the most diverse, and starting to be a little bit more reflective of what, to both of y'all's points, what today's home buyers and what homeowners are going to look like over the next 20 years. Before we wrap, I want to give each of y'all a chance. DeAndre, we'll start with you and then we'll wrap with Aaron. There's one thing that you could, piece of advice or nugget of information that you could share with everyone today, specifically around diversity, inclusion, equity. DeAndre, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say, it's all about being open to learning. It really is. It's about, kind of understanding that we all come to the table with our own backgrounds, our own biases, but it's being open to learning and sharing. And through that learning piece is how we're going to really be able to connect, right? And by connecting, it's going to lead to business success because you're going to learn more about about the home buyer, about your client, and what's going to be the best way to service them. And it's also, you're putting a stake in the ground. It's about changing, and making sure that we have a better future so that diversity and inclusion at some point becomes part. We won't need to have sessions like this, right? Because people will be very knowledgeable and diversity and inclusion will be very apparent in the way that we run our businesses and the way that we deal with each other.
Love that. Aaron, what about you?
I would say if there's one thing I want people to walk away with is understanding that diversity, equity, and inclusion is all of our responsibility. It's not just one person. It's not just the coach. It's not just your DE&I officers. It is every person's responsibility. And the actions that we take every day, whether we choose to learn a little bit more or not, they all impact every person around us. So just focus on being part of the solution and finding little ways and actions that you can make a better tomorrow for yourself, future generations, the people around you, the people you touch, because that's how you really create value.
Amazing. You guys have been so wonderful. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation today. Thank you both for joining us. We are going to call it a day here. If y'all have any questions around diversity, equity, inclusion, how you can focus on this in your own community, how you can focus on this with your business, please drop it in the comments. You can always feel free to reach out to us. We'll get you connected with the teams at UWM and Homepoint. We've got some people here focused on Spark and Ignite full-time as well that would love to chat with you about things that they've learned through this first class of people that are wrapping right now. They're about to graduate and start their own businesses. We've got about 150 people that are ready to either open their own broker shop or go work for a broker within our community that would not have had access or opportunity to do so without partners like Homepoint and UWM and partnering with AIME on both Spark and Ignite. So to that, we just have to say thank you to y'all and your teams. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.